Hi, everybody. Welcome to Exploring Sunday Scriptures for this week. It is November the 21st, 2023. These are the scriptures for this Sunday, November 26th, 2023, the last Lord's Day, the last Sunday in the liturgical year. So the liturgical year begins with the first Sunday on Advent and concludes with the Reign of Christ, or Christ the King Sunday, the last Sunday prior to the next year's Lent. So nearly like our secular calendar in the sense of only being about a month off of when we in the secular calendar move from one year to the next, but slightly different in the sense that Advent really begins our new year. And so as we look for the coming of the Lord, so we begin the new year with that looking towards Christ's return. But before that time, we have this Sunday, the Reign of Christ, or Christ the King Sunday. So we've departed now from our series about Yours Are the Hands of Christ, so looking at hands specifically, and are going back to the lectionary, that 3-year cycle of readings of the Old Testament, New Testament, and Gospels, which move us through reading the majority of the Bible over the course of 3 years and match seasonal foci. So in Advent, they match sort of the return of Jesus and ultimately the story of his first birth as well. And in other seasons, in Lent, they progress us towards Jerusalem. So we return to that for the Reign of Christ Sunday, and we will stay with that through Advent and into the new year before we probably take up a series in Lent and turn our focus in worship towards that. Now, the Reign of Christ Sunday is, I think, the newest of all of the special days also observed on the Protestant worship calendar, or within the Protestant lectionary calendar, in addition to the Roman Catholic calendar. And it was added first in the Roman Catholic calendar in 1925 by the Pope at that time, who sought to combat the increase in secularism and other phenomenon of that time period by returning focus specifically in this celebration towards what should stand central in our lives and ultimately guide our interactions with each other and even our being on the earth. And so placing this here sort of as a reminder or a constant of that kind of need to return to God and to make sure that first and foremost in our lives is our faith in God, is our devotion to God and Christ as the incarnation of God, the reign of Christ in our lives. So how is Christ, we as Christ's body, living out that truth within our own lives? Let's launch into the scriptures associated with the Reign of Christ Sunday. So we begin with Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is an early book of the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible. When we are hearing from Deuteronomy, this is the story ultimately of Moses and the Israelite people. So when we get to Exodus and Deuteronomy, we're in that period of time where the Israelites either are in Egypt or in the wilderness wandering, receiving the law, and ultimately the foundations of what will be their communal life moving forward. So that's sort of where we are in relation to this. And this is early in Deuteronomy, the 8th chapter. So let's launch into it, and that may give us a little clue as to what's happening at this time that we can refer back to. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land flowing with streams, with springs and underground waters welling up in the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land where you may eat bread without scarcity, where you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron and from whose hills you may mine copper. You shall eat your fill and bless the Lord your God for the good land that he has given you. Take care that you do not forget the Lord your God by failing to keep his commandments, his ordinances, and his statutes, which I am commanding you today. When you've eaten your fill and have built fine houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then do not exalt yourself, forgetting the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness and arid wasteland with poisonous snakes and scorpions. He made water flow for you from flint rock and fed you in the wilderness with manna that your ancestors did not know, to humble you and to test you, and in the end, to do you good. Do not say to yourself, my power and the might of my own hand have gotten me this wealth. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, so that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your ancestors, as he is doing to you today. That's a great passage. This follows Thanksgiving, but in some ways for us to reflect back on, having just gone through the experience of Thanksgiving, is when our tables are weighed down so well, when we are blessed with what lies before us, when we're capable of meeting our needs, both with roof over our head and food on our tables. We should, in those moments, return our thanks to God first and foremost, and not think that it is simply by virtue of everything that we've done that we are enjoying what is there. Now, this is referring to a time they have not yet experienced. So it's also looking ahead. And so for those perhaps that don't enjoy the same things at this moment or are struggling amid times of challenge, this scripture serves as a hope that there lies in the future this time in which the circumstances that currently are will be different. And you hear some of those differences being upheld here. And so it talks about the food and the bounty and the things that perhaps are lacking at this time that won't be lacking in this future. And so that as we experience plenty, even though we might be experiencing want right now, when we are experiencing plenty, an imperative part of that, as we lift up our hands, perhaps in times of want, in times of concern and distress, God, where are you? Be with me. That in times of plenty that we say, God, thank you for always being with me, and return that thanks. So remember God amid those times. Keep us humble. So part of the experience here is with God central in our lives. It keeps us humble, and in that humbleness also encourages us perhaps to share the bounty of wherever we are, remembering the times that were more challenging to us. Let's turn to our New Testament reading, 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 6 through 15. Paul writes there, the point is this, the one who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and the one who sows bountifully will reap bountifully. Each of you must give as you have made up your mind, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to provide you with every blessing in abundance, so that by always having enough of everything, you may share abundantly in every good work. As it is written, he scatters abroad, he gives to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way for your great generosity, which will produce thanksgiving to God through us. For the rendering of this ministry not only supplies the needs of the saints, but also overflows with many thanksgivings to God. Through the testifying of this ministry, you glorify God by your obedience to the confession of the gospel of Christ, and by the generosity of your sharing with them and with all others, while they long for you and pray for you because of the surpassing grace of God that he has given you. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. It's a great parallel to the Old Testament. This is, of course, looking at living with a heart of generosity or plenty and sharing that. Speaking of ministry, and so while we certainly think of that in material ways, and ministry has a material component of offering ourselves, of giving things that we may help and encourage others, so this also is broader than that and inclusive of prayers and our general way of being in the world. So it was only a week ago that we were thinking about other words that came from Paul's writing of being of one accord and in unity and in peace and treating one another with love and as siblings, as family members, all of us, whomever was around us. So this is likewise trying to uplift the same thing. Give as simply a part and component of who you are as a follower of Christ. So it's not one of compulsion that you are forced to do this, but rather this is an offshoot of your own faith. It's a natural outcome of your faith. And that begins with you sow sparingly, you reap sparingly, you sow bountifully, you reap bountifully. So the more that you are generous in sharing God's grace and love with the world in all of its different varied forms, the more generous also that will return to yourself tenfold. I like to think that what we put out into the world, so also we get back. And so if you put good out into the world, so the good does return. Now that's very karmic, which is kind of anti-grace, which is we don't do anything to earn grace, where really part of what I think is resonant here is not just the good that we put out, we get back, but we can do no less based on the good already given us that we didn't do anything to deserve, to put more good out there. And as we put more good out there, so the good multiplies, and we also experience perhaps the effects of that multiplication of the good. That may be a better way to express it than I did prior. Let's take one more jump over to the gospel reading for this week, Luke chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourself to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God, except this foreigner?" Then he said, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." So this is another episode or incident where we have a Samaritan being the highlight of the story. Samaritans were, as Jesus says, foreigners that were really looked down upon. In addition to being a Samaritan, he is also afflicted with this skin disorder, as universalized in the biblical message as leprosy. It's hard to know exactly what disorder we're talking about, but that's kind of what grouped everything together. There was a concern that this was something that could spread, and so often there were leper colonies, or lepers were not included within towns or villages, or ostracized socially for concern that it was going to spread. So when we have these 10 lepers, it probably really represents a small leper colony, that these were 10 individuals with the same affliction that lived together, because that was their only choice for any sort of communal existence, disincluded as they were from participation in religious life or civic life anywhere else. Obviously, Jesus' fame is spread enough that when they see Jesus, they know who he is. And so asking for his mercy is a recognition that Jesus has been a healer and is identified in that way as somebody who can heal. They ask for mercy, not necessarily for healing, but for mercy, for kindness. Maybe it is kind of an ask for healing, but it's not a direct request for healing. Then we have Jesus just telling them what to go do. So he just says, go to the priest. Now again, they weren't allowed within the religious life. If they happened to be healed, though, they would be readmitted into the community. And that is essentially what the text says happens on their way. As they are on their way, there is this healing, which allows for their inclusion back into the religious community. But only one of them recognizes that that healing has happened because of that encounter with Jesus, and is moved by that encounter, not to go on to the priest as was ordered, but to return to the source of that which has cured his illness, has healed him of his affliction, And then we have this exchange. So he goes simply to return gratitude and thanks. That's it. Thank you for what you did. And Jesus points out he's the only one among 10 that bothered to or recognized that. And he was one that doesn't have the same knowledge base as the other 9. So Jewish scriptures and other things like that that should have made them appreciate Jesus a little more. And then he caps this off with, get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well. So it is his fundamental belief, and that belief and gratitude to God, that has ultimately improved and healed him and done more than heal the physical affliction, but actually made him a complete person, more than a person who was recognized only by ethnicity, more than a person recognized only by health challenge, but as a whole person. Your faith has made you whole or complete. So these are the scriptures associated with Christ the King Sunday, or the Reign of Christ Sunday. And think about how each of these really does encourage us to center our lives on God, to make God the central aspect of our lives, and to let our lives unfold and flow in such a way that God's love, mercy, grace, forgiveness flows through us and out into the world. That as we do that on this Sunday, so as we enter Advent, in the season of Advent, we are not so distracted by all of the chaos of Advent and all the consumerism of Advent, but we maintain and hold God as central to the entire experience of Advent, of Christ's coming, Christ's return, and Christmas. So, Christ the King Sunday, I look forward to being with you, or as I tend to call it, the Reign of Christ Sunday. So, Christ reigning over our life, R-E-I-G-N, Christ's reign. As we will celebrate this and celebrate a final Sunday of the liturgical year before we begin Advent with the first Sunday in December. God bless you. See you on Sunday.